counsel, members of the jury. It's August 18th, 2010. Andrew Park wakes up in the morning and begins making pancakes for his daughter and packing his briefcase as he prepares for work. Suddenly, the phone rings, and the babysitter's calling in sick. So Mr. Park calls his neighbor Keith and asks if he can check on the kids throughout the day. Keith agrees. And that's when Hayden Duran arrives to drop Jesse off to spend the day with Sydney. Mr. Park tells Ms. Duran that there won't be a babysitter, but that a neighbor will check on the kids throughout the day. Hayden Duran leaves without a word. A few minutes later, Mr. Park tells his daughter he'll see her later, gives her a quick hug, and leaves for work. But what Mr. Park didn't know, what Mr. Park couldn't know, is that for months, Jessie Duran was growing more and more obsessed with guns. That Jessie Duran told her mother, Hayden Duran, I want to hold a real gun. That just one day before Jessie Duran shot and killed Sydney Park, Jessie told her mother, I want to play with the gun in the Park zone. Mr. Park left Jessie Duran in his home on August 18th without knowing any of this, because Hayden Duran chose to be silent. 45 minutes after leaving for work, Mr. Park gets a call. The police officer tells him, Mr. Park, you need to come home right away. Mr. Park jumps in his car as fast as he can. His daughter is the only thing on his mind. He pulls up to his house to see police lights flashing. He can't park in his driveway because it's blocked by an ambulance. He leaves his car in the middle of the street. He pushes past the crowd of strangers at the front door. He walks into his home, and the first thing he sees are his daughter's favorite shoes on her tiny feet. But Mr. Park can't see his daughter's face because it's covered by a white sheet. Members of the jury, this is the cost of Hayden Duran's silence. A cost that Mr. Park pays every single day. That is why we brought a claim of negligent parental supervision against the defendant, Hayden Duran, for the wrongful death of Sydney Park. And because we brought the claim, we held what was called the burden of proof. And that means that we had to prove to you each element of our claim by a preponderance of the evidence, or simply more likely than not. And to prove negligent parental supervision, we had to prove to you 5 elements. So let's take those elements one by one. First, that as a parent, Hayden Duran had a duty to exercise reasonable control over her daughter, Jessie Duran. Members of the jury, this doesn't mean that every parent is held responsible for every action of their child. But it does mean that if your child is exhibiting warning signs of potentially dangerous behavior, parents have a responsibility to act. And we heard today from Dr. Camille Solar, she sat right there, and she told you that Jessie drew this cartoon, Me and My Gun by Jessie D, and that it depicted Jessie pointing a gun at other children. We heard today that Jessie showed this cartoon to her mother, and what did Ms. Duran do? She put it on the fridge. And maybe that's reasonable. It's just a cartoon. But then we learned that Hayden Duran wrote this email, that Jessie only wanted to play games that involved shooting hundreds of people, that Jessie was going up to other children and pointing sticks at them and saying, bang, you're dead. We know that Hayden Duran was concerned because she told us that she was. She says, thank goodness we don't have a gun in our house. But Hayden Duran told you that she knew the Parks had a gun in their home. She knew that her child spent a lot of time during the summer in Mr. Park's home. She didn't send this email to Mr. Park. She chose to be silent. Most importantly, on August 17, 2010, her daughter came home after playing at the Parks and said, Mom, there's a gun in the Parks home and I want to play with it. Mr. Duran didn't immediately call Mr. Park and tell him that. When she walked her child over to the Parks house the next day and learned that there wouldn't be a babysitter, she didn't tell Mr. Park then. What was her excuse for her silence? The server crashed at the hospital. I was running late. She left her child alone with a gun in the home when she knew her child wanted to play with it because she was running late for work. And because Hayden Duran chose to be silent, Jesse was able to gain access to the Parks gun, which is the third element, that Jesse acted recklessly, negligently, or intentionally. We heard today from the crime scene investigator, Julian Sebastian, that the evidence was consistent with Jesse loading the gun, Jesse playing with the gun, and Jesse holding the gun when it fired. It's reckless to play with a loaded gun. Because of Jesse Duran's recklessness, Sydney Park was killed. That was our fourth element. Which leaves our fifth and our final element, that the actions or inactions of both Hayden and Jesse Duran were the direct and proximate cause of Sydney Park's death. Now, direct cause means that but for the actions or inactions of Hayden and Jesse Duran, Sydney Park would still be alive. Members of the jury, we showed you that Jesse Duran was holding the gun that killed Sydney Park, and we showed you that Hayden Duran's silence is what let Jesse gain access to that gun. But we also had to show you proximate cause. And proximate cause means was the outcome of what happened foreseeable. Members of the jury, it's foreseeable that if you play with a loaded gun, somebody could get hurt. Members of the jury, it's foreseeable that if your child tells you, I want to play with a real gun, and you walk your child over to a house that has a real gun, somebody could get hurt. Members of the jury, what happened on August 18th didn't have to happen. If Hayden Duran had said something about her child's fascination with guns, if Hayden Duran had sent that email to Mr. Park instead, had Hayden Duran said more on August 18th to Mr. Park about her child's fascination with guns, we wouldn't be in this courtroom today, and Sydney Park would still be alive. But Hayden Duran just dropped her child off and left for work. Hayden Duran chose to be silent. And there's a cause.